Caroline had a rough life, but she had worked her way to the military and she made something of herself.
Miss Bolen was found completely nude in a position which indicated a possible sexual assault.
She had been suffocated to death in her own bed.
The crime scene was unusual. There were no signs of forced entry to the house. So of course the first people you look at are husbands, anyone that she dated.
There were flowers from 4 different individual males.
All of us had speculations of who could have done it. We had heard her son say it sounded like his dad's truck pulling off.
One suspect was reported to be very angry with the victim. It was reported that he had made a comment, "I'm glad the bitch is dead."
They knocked on a lot of doors, they talked to a lot of people.
There were no answers for so many years.
As we chased the different branches of the family tree, we learned of sexual deviancy.
From what I understand, he was a serial rapist. They said he watched her, and then he decided to take his move.
As a parent, I can't imagine what she felt in those final moments.
Caroline was wild. She's always been the free-spirited one. She always spoke her mind. My name is Patricia Langford. I go by Trish, and I am Caroline's sister. She was amazing. She always had me in tow. I was always with her. She made sure I was taken care of. I mean, don't get me wrong, we were sisters, we fought. But yeah, we always got along pretty much. Caroline had a rough life. Mom didn't know that our stepdad was molesting Caroline from the time she was 11. My stepfather was very abusive. He was abusive to all of us. Caroline ended up leaving about when she was 17, and her out was getting married, and she ended up having her daughter. She had worked her way to the military, and she made something of herself. She fixed tanks and half-tons and stuff, and she loved it. She loved mechanics. She had divorced Eddie. She got married again to a guy named Michael, and then she had her son. Years later, Caroline and Michael ended up divorcing, and in 1988, she moved into the place in Silsbee. She hadn't been there but just a few weeks. She was working at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and she had lots of friends there. And her son, who she had custody of, she had gone and put him in school, and they were enjoying life. She was back on track, and she seemed to be real happy there.
On July 28, 1988, Silsbee Police Department received a phone call involving a possible deceased female inside a residence on Cooks Road. I'm Justin Holt. I'm an investigator with a special assignment unit for the Silsbee Police Department. An individual had showed up to his girlfriend's house. She was supposed to be at work, so he thought it was kind of odd. The door was locked upon the boyfriend's arrival. He saw his girlfriend in bed with her 6-year-old son from a window outside her house. He had to knock on the window to wake up the son. The son walked over and let him in. At that time, he made entry into the house and realized that his girlfriend, Caroline Susan Bolen, was actually deceased. She was 26 years old at the time of her death. Another male showed up on scene. This was a co-worker and former boyfriend of the deceased. Phone calls were made to the Silsbee Police Department, and officers obviously arrived on scene. And so when police arrived, they have a boyfriend, a ex-boyfriend, a 6-year-old son, and the victim inside the residence.
The crime scene, when officers were called and arrived, was unusual. And it was unusual in that there were no signs of forced entry to the house. Her son was alive, appeared unharmed. He was a very small child at the time. Brandon Best, sergeant in the Texas Rangers, cold case team, Company A out of Houston. Carolyn was in her bed.
She had been covered up with a blanket, but was found completely nude in a position which indicated a possible sexual assault. There was biological evidence found on scene. There was blood detected on some of the bedding and clothing. Just about everything you can imagine was collected and preserved. They collected every bit of bedding, collected clothing, photographed, documented everything they observed.
July 29th, 1988, I had come home. I was greeted by my landlord. And when I went into the house, she told me that I needed to call this number. I called it. Caroline's ex-mother-in-law told me that she had been murdered. Then I had to go and I had to tell my mom that Caroline had passed away. And she asked me how, and then I had to tell her she was murdered. And of course, we all cried. It was devastating. Completely devastating. It makes you think about your own mortality. It makes you worry whether or not you're going to be there any longer than she was. She never was happy long enough. Everything always seemed to happen bad. That she never had a really long period of time to be happy. And for me, it tore my world apart.
During the autopsy, they performed a standard rape kit. It was determined that Miss Bolen had been sexually assaulted vaginally, orally, and anally. Evidence was found that the victim did fight back. She had evidence of defensive wounds. There was evidence found from blood underneath her fingernails. The victim also had a partially collapsed lung, as well as biological evidence of semen.
They would scrape all the fingernails. They would swab their hands. They would do a complete set of buccal swabs as well as blood work. They were able to retrieve swabs from her body that we later found had male DNA.
The victim's official cause of death was asphyxiation.
I later found out from the police that she had been suffocated to death in her own bed and then had been sodomized and raped. And her son was in the house while all this went on. Her son was sleeping on the couch, and when he woke up, he had went into her room. He asked her if she was cold. He told the police that, and he had covered her up. When the police found her son, he had been sleeping in the same bed with her, and he was comforting her because she was cold.
As investigators started to retrace the timeline of what led up to this moment, they found that the night before, on July 27th, 1988, the victim had gone bowling with friends and coworkers. She had come home around 11 o'clock with her 6-year-old son. We interviewed her landlord, who owned the property and also lived next door. He advised that when he went to bed around midnight, the lights were still on inside the house. At approximately 5:50 the next morning, a passerby that lived in the area observed a small pickup truck in the driveway, two-tone blue, chrome trim. He observed a male individual leaving the residence, wiping his hands with some cloth, to which he put in the pickup truck. He got in the pickup truck and proceeded south on Cooks Road. No plate was provided. Investigators started beginning to chase down some leads with that as they canvassed the area. One of the other aspects of this case is we have got a 6-year-old child that was inside the residence at the time of the murder. If this is a stranger, why did he leave the son alive? There's no signs of forced entry on the home, which could possibly indicate that she may have known the individual. That was a big question mark for initial investigators.
A stranger homicide is extremely rare. Nobody thought that this was going to be a stranger type case. So of course the first people you look at are husbands, anyone that she dated.
All of us had speculations of who could have done it. We thought maybe it was the boyfriend because they had just broke up, from what I understand, the day before. And then another time we thought it was another ex-husband because we had heard her son say it sounded like his dad's truck pulling off. So we just didn't know.
Based on interviews with the son remembers then waking up to his mom saying, "Roger is here." Roger was the name of the initial boyfriend that found Miss Bolen deceased.
So that kind of puts more into your head of how are you the one to find her? And then while we were there getting her stuff, we had went and met his family. And he walked in and he seen me and he stormed out the door and left. Wouldn't even talk to us. And I thought that was really strange. And that's when I thought, well, maybe he is guilty.
He actually did have a vehicle that matched that physical description, down to the color and the loud exhaust. One of the things that they noted during the investigation was there were 4 different notes and flowers from 4 different individual males.
She was a single, young, good-looking woman and had 5 or 6 dating relationships over, say, a couple of year period. Well, every one of those guys was looked at.
During the initial investigation, they developed 4 primary subjects of interest. The initial boyfriend, Roger, that was the first person that actually showed up on scene. The former relationship that Ms. Bolen had, that was the second on scene. The third subject of interest was going to be the next door neighbor, the landlord. The landlord was the last person that had observed the victim's residence. Investigators chased down their timelines from what they did that night, where they were, what their alibis were. We were able to obtain voluntary DNA samples from those 3 suspects, but it took a little bit for the advancement of that technology to come forward to be able to be tested. As investigators began to reach towards the public, it was learned that Ms. Bolen was involved with another relationship at work. That's where the 4th subject of interest came up during the initial investigation.
One of the suspects in this case was another boyfriend of hers that she had had a lot of problems with over the years. Potentially some assaultive behavior. They worked together at the same hospital. There were a lot of things that pointed to him.
The male subject in that relationship was reported to be very angry with the victim. It was reported that he had made a comment, "I'm glad the bitch is dead."
There were so many signs that pointed towards him, but they looked at it really hard and did a good job and didn't charge him. Detectives that were on the case at the time started looking at who sex offenders are in the area. This was old-fashioned police work, boots on the ground, interviewing everybody that could be interviewed, any known sex offenders, any subjects in the area that just might be there, that led to absolutely nothing.
We set up her funeral. She had one of the nicest caskets and she was dressed in a beautiful pink flowery dress. She was buried in the National Cemetery because she was in the service. Her fingernails were broken. We made sure she had a bouquet in her hands so it wouldn't be seen. She always had immaculate long nails. She fought hard.
Over the years, this was reopened and examined numerous times. Technology caught up. The initial samples from our original suspects were examined, and all 3 were eliminated as a possible contributor in this case.
In 2005, Chief Dennis Allen reopened that case because it had always stuck with him. And I walked in his office one day and seen him looking at it. That's when I first learned about this case. My name is Sean Blackwell and I'm the police chief at the Silsbee Police Department.
The case was reviewed for what we may have missed, where could we go from here, and really only one subject of interest was known at that time, and it just wasn't able to move forward. In approximately 2019, I was conducting an assignment overseeing the property. During that time, I stumbled across this case.
He's like, "Hey, Chief, I'd really like to look at this case." I said, "Yeah, let's look at it. Let's see what we can find and see where it goes."
We were going through the Beaumont office. So we were actually looking for cold cases that hadn't been worked on in a long time, and we were actually looking at another case. And inside that box was a lab submittal report that had the name Caroline Susan Bolen on it. Somehow that piece of paper fell into another cold case file, which is how we started the case.
Ranger Bess, who I had never met before this time, calls me and says, "Hey, I've got this case and I'm looking at it." I said, "Well, dang, I just stumbled across this case looking through property." So he started working with me and we were off to the races from that point.
Justin is a great detective, a very detail-oriented person, which is exactly is what's needed in a case like this. You need somebody like me that's willing to run and gun and go and talk to everybody and do those things, and you've got to have someone that can really dissect every piece of it.
The initial report was approximately 490 something pages. We're going to go through, we're going to find out each individual thing that was submitted, basically using the report as our supplement to find the evidence, and let's figure out where we can go from here with our technology.
I got a text message from her daughter saying that they have opened the case. You know, my mom, she had passed on at the time, so I couldn't tell her. Yeah, we were kind of shocked, excited, didn't think that would ever happen in our lifetime.
So the first thing we had to do was find everything. We probably spent 10, 15, 20 days going through everything, collecting everything, finding everything.
The evidence that was collected back in the 80s by the initial investigators, they did a great job of collecting the evidence, maintaining the evidence.
We were able to collect and find the original rape kit. We were also able to obtain the biological sample obtained during the autopsy, which would have been semen. We were able to discover that blood was detected underneath the victim's fingernails. However, it was never processed further from there due to limited technology from 1988. We were at a crossroads with this case at one point. There's only so much evidence you'll ever have. As they continue to test, my quantities become more limited in the future. So every time you touch a piece of evidence, there's a certain consideration with that. And Ranger Bess and I and Chief Blackwell all had to sit down and convene together with the lab. And it was determined, says, listen, this is it. This is all we have. So if we go forward with this, this is the last time this will ever be tested. That was a gut-wrenching moment to know that you can't mess this up. There were certain key evidence that we were able to collectively decide, let's submit these now and let's see where we can go from here. First, the blood found underneath the victim's fingernails, and also biological evidence, and we were able to resubmit those to the Texas DPS Houston Crime Lab. They were able to extract a DNA profile for our suspect during this case, and this was important because this was the very first time that had ever occurred.
They put it in the CODIS and it comes back to where there is no hits in CODIS.
I remember the letdown that everybody had when it's like, we've got nothing. So now we're back to a square one dead end and we've already chased our evidence.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that the DNA profile is no good? Or has this guy not committed any crimes since CODIS existed?
As we're going through the evidence of this case, we still have one potential lead from the initial investigation. That was that relationship with the male co-worker that was reportedly happy the suspect was ultimately killed. At the time we collected the case, he had not been interviewed. We did not have a DNA sample provided. While we were investigating on the location and the whereabouts of this suspect, the subject interest brother actually came forward. Out of nowhere, we were told that he wanted to talk to us about this old cold case. So Ranger Bess and I met with the subject of interest brother. Conveniently enough, he did agree to submit to a DNA sample, which we were able to use and exclude his brother as a subject of interest, which did leave us with 0 suspects to go from here.
Years ago, we went to this luncheon and heard Othram do a presentation over forensic genealogy. At the time, it was some groundbreaking technology.
We felt pretty certain that this thing had been run to ground as hard as it could have been run to ground, and that our only hope was going to be DNA in this case. And of course, the first place we turned was to Othram.
From that point, now we're dealing with private, so we deal with funding issues.
When we first heard about this case at Othram, we said, we can't let funding be what doesn't allow this case to get solved or doesn't allow these family members to get answers to what happened to their mom, their sister. We need to figure out how to fund this case. And we did that by contacting nonprofits. My name is Dr. Kristen Middleman, and I'm the Chief Development Officer at Othram. We were able to reach out to Season of Justice. Brendan Bess was able to get an application approved, and they decided that they would pay for the testing.
Caroline Bolen was murdered in July of 1988 couple months after that, in October of 1988, one county over in Jefferson County, my Aunt Patricia was murdered. I'm Colby Lazion. I'm the Chief of Staff here at Othram. My Aunt Patricia went to a meeting one evening and she never came home. Her body was found underneath a bridge. She basically drowned. She had been assaulted, and for a number of years, no one knew who was responsible. I can remember being a kid in small town, rural Louisiana, and first hearing the story as told by my grandpa about his sister Patricia, and how much pain he felt, that her kids felt, that her husband felt. A decade at least had passed since his sister had been murdered, and there were no answers. In 2019, Pat's daughter called the Texas Rangers and asked if her mom's case could be reopened. The person who answered that call was Ranger Brandon Bess.
She told me about her mother being murdered. She knew who murdered her mother. Law enforcement wasn't doing anything about it. This guy had got off, had been involved in a number of sex crimes, a number of horrible events. Tina is in a convenience store buying something and looks up, and there he is in a convenience store. The man that she knows killed her mother. The law enforcement officers involved told me they also believed that is who killed their mother. They never could find enough evidence or proof, but what changed was DNA. The Port Arthur Police Department had done a good job of keeping the evidence properly stored, so that leads to DNA testing, gets us that hit, we're able to make an arrest. He's taken to trial, convicted, also sentenced to life, and dies in prison less than 2 years after we got him there.
I had never personally met Ranger Bess, but my family sung his praises. My grandpa, I remember when he first found out the news that someone had been identified and arrested for his sister's murder, he said, "There's an angel of a man in Texas and his name is Brandon. I don't know who he is, but I'd really, really like to shake his hand."
I was here at Othram one day, and a young man came up to me who introduced himself as Colby, and he said, "Hey, you were the one that saw my aunt's murder."
I introduced myself to him. We took a selfie. It's crazy how small the world really is and how Brandon Bess touched my family.
Those tragedies touch everyone in law enforcement, in the sciences, all over. That, you know, we've now got a family connection to Othram with Colby.
So from that point, we were able to get the samples over to Othram from the Houston Crime Lab.
In October of 2022, evidence arrives to Othram. In this particular case, we received DNA extract. There were swabs of Caroline's fingernails that were taken after her murder.
We proceeded with our suitability analysis. That is the test that allows you to know whether or not the DNA sample is suitable for building one of these profiles that will allow you to infer someone's identity.
So in this particular case, in 2022, by the time that Othram was involved, an extensive amount of DNA testing had been done. And so the different evidence items that are available have been subjected to a number of different tests. And DNA testing is consumptive. So each time you test the DNA from an evidence item, that DNA is gone. And you can't go back infinity times and get DNA from a single evidence item. At some point, the DNA will be gone and you won't be able to work with that evidence item any longer.
We hold ourselves to a standard of not consuming evidence or budget unless we are certain that we can bring value to an investigation. That is what we call suitability analysis. And so we passed that, and we knew that we could build one of these profiles. The concern we had with this sample is, unfortunately, there was a lot of contamination and degradation, but it wasn't anything that Othram had not seen before.
The DNA did present some challenges for us. We were able to build a profile, but it did take some extra work.
That profile was uploaded to Family Tree DNA's database. As it uploaded, it identified all of these relatives, and our genealogist started to work the case, and the genealogy investigation in this case was quite complex.
When you're using forensic genetic genealogy, it's an iterative process. What oftentimes is required is there's some investigative work that has to be done, and that investigative work is usually an interview or a reference test. And so in this particular case, we proposed that a branch of the family be tested.
We look for the possibility of a reference tester so we could determine more quickly, without having to build out all the trees, if we need to move to one or another side of a family. And so we find a really good reference tester.
We were provided with a genealogy lead by we traveled halfway across the state of Texas for.
As law enforcement begins to look into it, they're beginning to get excited. They're tracking down the whereabouts of the person, only to find that the person has died.
A genealogy investigation can be quite unpredictable and challenging, to say the least. Just when you think you've got something that you get kind of excited about because profiles are developed, you'll be thrown a curveball. We're looking for DNA, and we find that not only is he deceased, but he's been cremated. Luckily in this case, the lead actually had a twin brother that was alive.
It was amazing and fortuitous, and the twin brother was more than happy to do a DNA test.
And so investigators were able to go out, procure some samples. We were able to build DNA profiles and then do the reference testing or the comparison of those profiles to the DNA profile of the unidentified suspect at this point. And that helped us to narrow the focus of the investigation.
Othram was able to provide us with certain investigative leads, in which led Ranger Bess and I across the state of Texas, obtaining DNA samples, talking with different family members through this family tree as we chase the different branches to isolate and exclude and figure out which way to go from here.
Cold cases are about getting people to cooperate with you, and especially these types of cold cases where you're having to get DNA. Justin was able to convince some folks that I dare say would never give their DNA up to a policeman for anything, and Justin was able to convince them that, hey, you're really going to help solve a case. This is not about you. This is about us building a family tree.
After the first round of reference testing was done, law enforcement comes back to Othram and says, this is who we talked to, these are the DNA samples we were able to get. We're able to do the comparisons, and what we learned is that we were able to eliminate one ancestral line of this family and then focus in on another. When we focused in on this other branch, it eventually took us to 3 brothers whose last name was Mosley.
We discovered that one of these brothers really fits genealogically and genetically as the person that might be the contributor to the DNA that was left at the crime scene.
Through this genealogy research, we were able to find that an individual named Alan Wayne Mosley resided in Silsbee in a nearby street at the time of the murder.
The potential perpetrator actually lived adjacent to Caroline Bolen's home at the time.
This is the power pole that powered the home that Caroline lived in 1980. Of course, they tore that down.
We traveled to the property and we spoke with individuals that lived there during that time. And you could actually see that he could observe the victim's house from the backside of his residence.
You have someone that was geographically in proximity. There's both genetic evidence and genealogical evidence, all pointing towards this individual as a candidate. Even with all that evidence, that's not enough to know for sure. At that point, you then have to do a direct comparison and determine if in fact he is the person who left the DNA at the crime scene. The challenge is that our individual has died. He died in 2006. So unfortunately, we don't have access to him anymore, and we need to find a close relative to essentially support whether or not he is likely or not likely to be the contributor to this DNA from the crime scene.
At that time, we tested the son of the suspect.
We were able to do a comparison, and what do you know? There's absolutely no relationship between these 2 men. So the person that we believe is the son of Alan Mosley is not the son of Alan Mosley.
This person shares no genetic similarity with the person we thought was responsible. So now we're at a crossroads. There's 2 possibilities. We've either built the tree incorrectly, the records are wrong, or something has happened such that we have an individual that we think is related to the person we're looking for, and perhaps he's not related.
You want to talk about a letdown? That's a letdown. And where in God's green earth do you go from here? We had a lot more questions than answers at this point.
You could assume that that means that you're on the wrong path, or there could be some other explanation.
The first thing we do is go back to revisit all the work, and we look for any other possible explanation. Reworking the entire tree, looking at it from a whole different angle, takes us to the same person. There's just no other possibilities that we can determine. So we decide that what's possible is that the relationship is not correct. That part of the tree could be wrong in that he may not actually be the son of Alan Wayne Mosley.
It was discovered that he is not the biological son of the suspect. A family member came forward and said that his grandfather was actually his father. His mother had been raped by her father, and he was the product of that relationship, not our suspects. But our suspect had a second son that we were able to travel to Santa Fe, Texas, and he voluntarily submitted his DNA for analysis, in which we were able to confirm that the other son was, in fact, a son of our suspect in this case. The suspect actually had 2 other living brothers that also voluntarily submitted their DNA samples as well for comparison. They were confirmed and eliminated their possible contribution as a suspect in this case, so therefore they were excluded.
We were able to then return a full report to law enforcement, and then they were able to take the final step in doing a confirmatory test to determine that, in fact, Alan Wayne Mosley was a match for the DNA that was left at the crime scene.
We know through DNA that Alan Wayne Mosley committed this offense. When we got the results back, it brought us to your father. And there's no really easy way of saying this, but Bolen, the murder case, he is going to be your actor in that case.
I kind of figured the way y'all was investigating it, it'd probably turn out that way.
Yes, sir. It's going to be a rape homicide.
Okay.
There will be a time to talk more in detail about all this stuff. Obviously, I don't know how the other side of the family is going to react or anything like that, but at the end of the day, they've waited decades.
Yeah.
And it's been a problem.
Yeah. Well, you know, I put myself in their shoes. If that would happen to me, I would want closure.
Ranger Bess told me that they figured out who had done it, that they had DNA. I just never thought that day would come. And he told me the name, and I had never heard of this person. I was shocked, completely shocked.
Our investigation then turns into what can we find out about this suspect? What do we know about him? Let's figure out anything we can. We learned that Alan Wayne Mosley had committed suicide in 2006 in Tulsa, Oklahoma after having an argument with his wife. I was able to interview his wife. She appeared to be completely unaware of Alan Wayne's involvement with this case. We had several outcries that were made from other family members that was reported where he had molested both children and grandchildren. He was reported to be a sexual deviant up until his death. Is this a surprise to you, or is this something that you could picture him actually doing?
No, because I would have never thought.
Okay.
From the little bit that I did get to know him and be around him, I'd never thought this.
Okay. It sounds like Alan kind of had a lot of lives that he kept people at arm's length from.
Sort of a split personality type thing.
Not so much, more of a concealment of deviance. And there's others that have come forward that obviously that weren't murdered, and it's painting a pretty good picture.
He was previously connected to a rape a few years prior, and at the time that Caroline was murdered, he was actually supposed to be under court-ordered supervision because of his prior rape charge. So he was released, but he was supposed to be supervised at all times.
So he was free to do whatever he wanted to do. And he had 18 years to do this to other people. How was he not where he was supposed to be? The question of the century, you know.
A lot of older sexual assault cases that we found from the 70s, from the 80s, and even going into the 90s weren't taken very seriously. As he was a prior offender, his DNA should have been in the national DNA system as a sex offender. So, looking back at the case, seeing all those things that weren't done in the county, he would have been an immediate suspect in this case.
He was a known rapist. He still was able to rape and murder her in front of her child, and somehow no one thought, oh, we should question the known rapist down the street. That is how little the systems connect between one another. It would have been great for someone to say, well, we have a supervised rapist that can look into her backyard. Let's go question him. That is why it is really important for different PDs, police stations, sheriff's offices, law enforcement as a whole, whether it's federal, local, or state, to be able to communicate with one another so that you can more quickly come to these conclusions and answers.
We were able to discover that at the time of the murder, Alan Wayne Mosley was actually home alone. His wife was in the hospital in Galveston, along with her kids, which presented a window of opportunity for Alan.
They said he watched her. That's what they think he did. And then he decided to take his move.
After midnight, between the hours of 12 and 4:30 in the morning, a loud car pulls up into the driveway. Roger owns one of those. When they initially interviewed the son, they knew that the mother had told the son, Roger is here. We believe it to be a statement of question. It's almost like woke up, Roger's here. She then goes to the door. She was not presented obviously with Roger, she's presented with Alan Wayne, an individual who has a history of rape. The victim in that initial rape described that Alan Wayne threatened her with a weapon and stated that he wouldn't hurt her, wouldn't kill her, if she complied. So based on his MO, we believe that he did threaten her. With her 6-year-old son in the house, she has every incentive to comply with Alan Wayne's demands. The son gave a statement that he heard the individual and his mother, but couldn't make out exactly what they were saying, but that they were shaking the bed. At one point, the male suspect actually tells her 6-year-old son, go back to sleep. So he does.
When you hear that that happened in front of a child, as a parent, I can't imagine what she felt in those final moments. What is going through your head? Is your child going to survive? Not? How do you protect them? And I'm certain she died thinking about her child.
Based on the physical evidence found on the victim's body, we know that the victim didn't initially fight back. Based on family members' statements that we've learned from her personality is Caroline is a fighter. She would never let somebody do that to her. Was this consensual? Was the question of the initial investigators. You have to question that. Was that a consensual encounter that just went wrong and somebody fled? Well, the evidence tells you it's not. We know that she eventually did fight back, and she complied until she could no longer comply. And that's the fight of life. She was mainly overpowered, but by her fighting back at the end, she drew enough blood from our suspect and able to allow us to identify him. Sometime earlier that night, the suspect left, waking the son up on his way out by the sound of his engine or vehicle. Alan Wayne owned a Ford Torino that had a glass pack, no muffler exhaust, which, for those that don't know, is extremely loud and would wake somebody up out of their sleep. The next morning, approximately 5:50, we know that he returned to the scene in a pickup truck. He was observed wiping his hands, which was indicative of cleaning a scene. The front door being locked was something that troubled investigators for decades. And it wasn't until after the suspect was identified that we learned that he was a certified locksmith as well. We know that a passerby witness then observes a vehicle that does not match a description of anything that Alan Wayne owned, but he describes a male that matches Alan Wayne Mosley. During the investigation, we were going through photo albums with the suspect's family, and we were able to locate the back of a pickup truck. I pointed to that truck and I said, "Whose truck is this?" It matched almost to a T. They said, "That was his brother-in-law." "Really? So where did he live?" "Next door." Alan Wayne would have had access to his brother-in-law's pickup truck through knowledge of where the vehicle's keys were located. On the conclusion of the investigation, we actually met with the district attorney. We discussed obtaining an indictment for him as a symbolic gesture for the family.
But just because it's obvious that this was the guy that committed that crime, that doesn't mean that the district attorney in the county is going to take it before a grand jury and see if a grand jury will indict it.
Unfortunately, in the state of Texas, the law doesn't allow that, or he would have been charged with capital murder, aggravated sexual assault.
From what I understand, he was a serial rapist, and he had never killed anybody before. Why would he kill her? That's my biggest question.
In a case like this, in any homicide, there's never closure. It's disappointing because you want to be able to get as many answers as you can to give to the family to help them heal.
We know that Alan Wayne Mosley, from his history, is a sexual deviant. After he died, there actually were women that came forward that he had made several sexual advances on them, even where they resided. This was a very disturbed man. So as much as I would have loved the self-satisfaction to be able to have him stand in court and face his crimes, I take solace in the fact that from 2006 on, not one more person was hurt or offended by him.
The good thing about the DNA in these old cases and everything that Othram is doing, all these agencies that are now making sure these databases are updated very quickly, that these private firms are coordinating with the state police agencies, with the federal agencies.
We are extremely grateful to Othram for their attentiveness and dedication to this case. Without genealogy, the family would not have had answers.
This is definitely a significant win for law enforcement in general, just knowing that if you have preserved evidence 30, 40 years ago, there's still a chance.
There's no such thing as an unsolvable case anymore if we have evidence that we can test.
Caroline Bolen was a young mom. Her life was ahead of her. So when you hear that someone at 26 years old has been raped and murdered in their own home, where they should feel the most safe, that is a devastating crime. And the fact that this person got away with it and got to end his life on his own terms is devastating to me. But at least his name is now known as a perpetrator.
You know, I've forgiven this person, but I'll never forget what he did. Because if I didn't forgive, I could not live my life. But I don't ever have to forget, and I don't ever have to forget her. Ever, ever, ever. Her daughter has a son, and then her son has 2 sons. So Caroline would have 3 grandchildren right now. She's missed out on all that.
Caroline had a daughter, Carrie Carver, who wanted to write a letter that could be read for this segment. So I just want Carrie to know that I'm grateful that she chose me to read this today. Thank you to Brendan Bess, Justin Holt, Sean Blackwell, and Othram for everything you have done to finally solve the murder of my mother. She has been deeply missed and will continue to be missed every single day. The love of a mother is like no other. It is unconditional and something that can never be replaced. I am forever grateful to everyone who has worked tirelessly to seek justice for her and to bring answers to our family. Her memory will live on in our hearts always. Sincerely, Carrie Carver.
I wished I could turn time back. Wished I could call her, talk to her. But you can't. You can't do that. It's all gone. And you try to live for her. And you try to always remember her the best you can. And not a day goes by that she's not in my mind. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. I'm who I am because of her, because of who she made me. She always told me I was strong, and I always thought I was the weak one. But she was right, like she pretty much always was.